The Zyrexians were a species defined by their mastery of combat. Their dual masters were legends across the galaxy, towering figures both in stature and reputation. Xylox was one of them, a warrior whose name inspired awe even among his own kind. His record was flawless, a perfect streak of victories carved into the annals of Zyrexian tradition. He lived for the duel, not merely as a test of skill, but as the ultimate expression of superiority. His species' creed was simple. Strength was the ultimate arbiter, and any who dared challenge it would face Zyrexian blades. The space station orbiting the contested planet of Trace-Sar Prime had seen its share of diplomatic meetings, but this one carried tension like a drawn bowstring. For years, humans and Zyrexians had vied for control of the planet's abundant mineral resources, but negotiations always seemed to end in deadlock. Today was different. The Zyrexians had made an unprecedented offer: resolve the dispute through a duel, one champion from each side. Winner takes all. It was both an opportunity and a trap, a way for the Zyrexians to assert dominance while claiming the moral high ground. Xylox stood in the center of the negotiation chamber, his 8-foot frame casting a long shadow. His 4 arms rested at his sides, but the twin energy blades strapped to his hips were a reminder of his deadly potential. His voice, deep and resonant, carried an air of finality as he spoke. "We tire of these endless talks. Let the matter be settled as it should have been from the start. In combat, choose your champion or admit your weakness." The human delegation exchanged uneasy glances. No one on their side had anticipated this. Xylox's challenge was a bold move, designed to exploit the human fear of Zyrexian combat prowess. Declining would mean conceding Trace-Sar Prime without a fight, a political disaster. Accepting was equally grim. Who could possibly stand against Xylox and live? It was then that Victor Kane spoke. "I'll do it." The room fell silent as heads turned toward him. Victor was not a diplomat, not a soldier on active duty, but a retired officer who had come to the station as part of the delegation's advisory team. His presence had been unremarkable until now. A middle-aged man with graying temples, dressed in plain attire that gave no hint of the fighter beneath. Yet his voice carried a calm authority that silenced even the murmurs of disbelief. "You..." Xylox's mandibles clicked in a gesture of amusement. "You dare stand against me? Do humans send their elders to die now?" Victor stepped forward, his movements deliberate, his gaze steady. "I'm not here to die, Xylox. I'm here to win." A ripple of unease spread through the room, even among the Zyrexians. There was no bravado in Victor's tone, no trace of fear or hesitation. It was the voice of a man who had faced death before and come out the other side. Xylox's amusement shifted to curiosity, though it was tinged with contempt. "Do you even wield a weapon worthy of this duel, human? Or shall I provide you one to make your defeat less humiliating?" Victor reached behind him and unsheathed a weapon that seemed almost anachronistic in this age of plasma rifles and energy shields, a katana. The blade gleamed in the sterile light of the chamber, its edge honed to a perfection that spoke of meticulous care. It was a weapon of the old world, of tradition and discipline, standing in stark contrast to the technological marvels of the Zyrexian energy blades. Xylox's mandibles parted in what could have been a grin, a primitive toy. Fitting. Victor smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see." The human delegation, still reeling from the sudden turn of events, scrambled to intervene. One of the diplomats, a wiry man named Langston, whispered harshly, "Victor, this is madness. You can't seriously think." Victor cut him off with a raised hand. "We don't have a choice, Langston. If we back down now, we lose everything. Trust me." Langston hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. The Zyrexians, bound by their code of honor, would not back down from a duel once it was issued. The only path forward was through Victor's blade. Xylox, impatient with the delay, gestured toward the chamber's exit. "Very well. Tomorrow at the first cycle, we will meet in the arena. Prepare yourself, human. Though it will not save you, With that, the Zyrexian turned and strode out, his steps reverberating through the floor. His entourage followed, leaving the humans to grapple with the gravity of what had just occurred. Victor remained still, the katana resting at his side. His expression betrayed no concern, no second-guessing. He had accepted the challenge not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. He knew the stakes better than anyone else in the room. This wasn't just about Tracer Prime or political leverage. It was about survival. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, and their position was precarious. A victory here wouldn't just secure resources. It would earn respect in a galaxy that valued strength above all. Langston approached him again, lowering his voice. "Do you really think you can beat him? He's a monster, Victor." Victor's gaze softened, and for a moment he almost looked tired. "I've faced monsters before, Langston. They all bleed." The diplomat wanted to press further, to ask how a human with a sword could possibly match a four-armed alien armed with energy blades. But something in Victor's demeanor stopped him. There was a weight in his words, a conviction that couldn't be argued with. As the humans filed out of the chamber, the tension in the air lingered. The duel was set, and the fate of Tracer Prime now rested on the shoulders of a retired swordsman with an archaic weapon. It was a gamble, one that could either secure humanity's place in the galaxy or doom it to subjugation. Victor Kane, however, wasn't thinking about the stakes or the odds. As he returned to his quarters and began inspecting his katana, his thoughts were elsewhere. He had studied the Zyrexians, their movements, their combat styles. He had seen the arrogance in Xylox's eyes and knew how to exploit it. The path ahead was perilous, but it was one he had walked before. Tomorrow, he would step into the arena, not as a symbol or a sacrifice, but as a warrior. The arena was a masterpiece of alien engineering, a circular platform suspended in a void of simulated stars. Around it, the holographic terrain shifted with unpredictable precision. Jagged cliffs, dense forests, and open plains materialized and dissolved in a heartbeat. The space station's massive viewing gallery buzzed with anticipation as spectators from across the galaxy gathered to witness the spectacle. Humans clustered nervously in one section, their voices hushed as the Zyrexians filled the opposite side with an undercurrent of chittering excitement. Victor Kane stepped onto the platform, his katana sheathed at his side. His expression was calm, unreadable, as though he were stepping into an old, familiar ritual. Across from him, Xylox loomed, his forearms stretching and flexing with ominous ease. The Zyrexian Duel Master's ceremonial armor shimmered under the arena lights, and his twin energy blades crackled to life, bathing his figure in a sharp, blue glow. He exuded the confidence of a predator certain of its kill. For a moment, the two combatants stood in silence, studying one another. Xylox's mandibles clicked, a sound of condescension. "I expected you to tremble by now, human. Perhaps you do not understand the gravity of what you face." Victor tilted his head slightly, his tone steady. "Or perhaps you don't understand what you started." The referee, a neutral observer from a third species, stepped forward to signal the duel's commencement. The arena's holographic terrain shifted once more, freezing into a barren desert under a glaring, artificial sun. The air was heavy with expectation. The referee raised a three-fingered hand. "Begin." Xylox moved first, his massive frame a blur of motion. His energy blades sang through the air as he closed the distance with astonishing speed, the ground beneath him cracking from the force of his charge. Victor sidestepped at the last instant, his katana flashing as he deflected the nearest blade. The clash of steel against energy resonated through the arena, a sharp, piercing sound that silenced the crowd. The Duel Master pressed the attack, his four arms working in tandem to unleash a relentless barrage of strikes. Each swing of his blades was calculated to overwhelm, to crush any defense with sheer ferocity. But Victor's movements were precise, almost surgical. He danced just beyond Xylox's reach, his katana intercepting the attacks with an economy of motion that seemed effortless. To the untrained eye, it appeared as though he was barely exerting himself, but the tightness in his jaw revealed the strain beneath the surface. "You're quick," Xylox snarled, his voice a low growl. "But you'll tire." "They all do." Victor didn't respond. He had no interest in verbal sparring. His focus was absolute. As Xylox lunged again, Victor shifted his stance, pivoting to redirect the alien's momentum. The dual master stumbled slightly, a misstep so minor it would have been imperceptible to most. But to Victor, it was an opening. He struck, his katana slicing through the air in a single, fluid motion. The tip of the blade grazed Xylox's shoulder, cutting through his armor and drawing the first blood. The arena erupted in shocked murmurs. The idea of a human wounding a Zyrexian dual master was unthinkable. Xylox glanced at the crimson streak on his shoulder, his mandibles flaring in what could only be anger. He roared, the sound reverberating like a thunderclap, and renewed his assault with an even greater ferocity. Victor weathered the storm, his katana a blur of silver as he deflected the onslaught. He had studied Zyrexian combat for years, understood their reliance on overwhelming strength and rigid techniques. Xylox was a master, but he was also predictable, bound by the traditions that had made him legendary. Victor, by contrast, fought with adaptability. He flowed like water, his movements fluid and unorthodox, designed to exploit every weakness in his opponent's form. The terrain shifted suddenly, the desert giving way to a dense jungle. Massive trees sprang up around the combatants, their branches casting long shadows across the ground. Xylox adapted immediately, using his superior size and strength to tear through the foliage. Victor, smaller and more agile, used the jungle to his advantage, weaving through the trees and forcing the dual master to chase him. Each encounter was a clash of precision against power, of calculated strikes against brute force. Then came the turning point. Xylox, growing impatient, unleashed a devastating combination, his blades carving through the air in arcs of energy. Victor ducked beneath one strike and parried another, his katana ringing with the impact. But instead of retreating, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His sudden aggression caught Xylox off guard, and in that split second of hesitation, Victor struck. His katana moved with blinding speed, severing one of Xylox's lower arms at the joint. The energy blade it had held deactivated as it clattered to the ground. The crowd gasped, the sound echoing across the arena. Xylox staggered back, his remaining blades raised defensively as he stared at the stump where his arm had been. His mandibles clicked furiously, his eyes narrowing with a mix of pain and disbelief. Victor held his ground, his blade steady. He didn't press the advantage, didn't gloat or taunt. His breathing was controlled, his focus unbroken. "You rely too much on your strength," he said quietly. "It blinds you." Xylox's roar this time was not one of anger but desperation. He charged again, his movements wild and uncoordinated, a stark contrast to the precision he had displayed earlier. Victor sidestepped the assault, his katana flashing once more. Another arm fell, and with it, another energy blade. The dual master fell to one knee, his chest heaving as he struggled to rise. The arena fell silent, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. Victor approached slowly, his katana lowered but still at the ready. He stopped just short of Xylox, meeting the alien's gaze with calm resolve. "You've lost," Victor said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Yield." For a moment, Xylox said nothing. Then, slowly, he lowered his remaining blades. The gesture was one of defeat, but also of respect. The referee stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "The human is victorious." The arena erupted into chaos. The Zyrexians were stunned, their pride wounded by the unthinkable outcome. The humans, though initially hesitant, broke into cheers, their voices carrying a mix of relief and triumph. But Victor paid them no mind. He turned and walked away, his katana still gleaming in the artificial sunlight, leaving Xylox to contemplate the price of arrogance. The arena was quiet now. The cheers and murmurs of the crowd fading into the distance as the combatants exited opposite sides of the platform. Victor Kane walked slowly, his katana sheathed, his posture calm but heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. Behind him, the simulated stars of the arena flickered and disappeared, leaving only a vast, sterile emptiness. He had won, but there was no celebration in his step, no triumph in his expression. In the corridor leading back to the human delegation's quarters, Victor paused, leaning briefly against the cold, metallic wall. His breathing was steady, but his mind was racing. The duel had tested every ounce of his skill, every lesson he had learned through years of discipline and battle. Xylox had been a formidable opponent, far more dangerous than Victor would ever admit aloud. The duel master's strength, his speed, and his unyielding ferocity had forced Victor to go beyond his limits. And yet, it was not brute force that had secured his victory, but the quiet, deliberate precision of a swordsman who had spent a lifetime mastering his craft. Langston met him near the entrance to the human quarters, his face pale, but his expression one of profound relief. "Victor," he said, his voice hushed, "you did it. I didn't think it was possible, but you—" Victor raised a hand, cutting him off. "It's done," he said simply. "Save the speeches for later." Langston hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let Victor pass. Inside the human quarters, the rest of the delegation erupted into applause and cheers as he entered. Men and women who had spent the last hours bracing for disaster now looked at him with awe, as if seeing him for the first time. Victor acknowledged them with a faint nod, but said nothing. He wasn't here for glory. He never had been. In the Zyrexian chamber, Xylox sat alone. His ceremonial armor, now battered and stained with his own blood, lay discarded on the floor. Two of his arms were heavily bandaged, the stumps throbbing with a dull, persistent pain. The weight of his defeat pressed down on him, like a crushing tide, heavier than the physical wounds he had sustained. For a Zyrexian duel master, defeat was more than dishonor. It was a shattering of identity, a crack in the foundation of everything he had built his life upon. And yet, as Xylox replayed the fight in his mind, he could not bring himself to hate his opponent. The human had been extraordinary, his movements impossibly precise, his strategy flawless. Xylox had underestimated him, dismissing him as a lesser being wielding an outdated weapon. That arrogance had cost him the duel, but it had also taught him something he had never expected to learn: respect. He would not remain a duel master after this. Zyrexian tradition was unforgiving, and his loss would force him to step down. But Xylox, for all his pride, was not blind to the value of growth. The human's victory had exposed the weaknesses in Zyrexian combat philosophy, the rigidity that left even the greatest warriors vulnerable to adaptability and innovation. Perhaps his legacy would not be one of triumphs, but of change. Later that evening, Victor found himself standing alone in one of the observation decks of the station. The sprawling expanse of space stretched out before him, stars glimmering like scattered diamonds against the void. He had cleaned his katana and returned it to its place at his side, but the fight still lingered in his mind. Each movement, each strike, played back with vivid clarity, not as a celebration but as a dissection. He had won, but he could not ignore how close he had come to losing. Footsteps behind him drew his attention, and he turned to see Xylox entering the room. The duel master had shed his armor, his massive frame wrapped in a simple cloak that did little to conceal his injuries. Victor straightened but did not reach for his weapon. Xylox's posture was not that of an enemy, but of someone seeking understanding. "You fight well," Xylox said, his voice subdued but steady. "Better than I imagined possible for your kind." Victor regarded him silently for a moment before responding. "And you're stronger than I gave you credit for. That was the closest duel I've fought in years." Xylox tilted his head, his mandibles clicking faintly. "You honor me with your words, though I do not deserve them. I failed human, not because of weakness, but because of arrogance. You saw it, didn't you?" Victor nodded. "You're bound by your traditions. They've made you strong, but they've also made you predictable. A fighter like you doesn't lose because of lack of skill. You lose because you believe there's only one way to win. The Zyrexian fell silent, his gaze shifting to the stars. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. When Xylox finally turned back to Victor, his expression was one of quiet determination. You've taught me something today, something I will not forget. Your kind may be new to the galaxy, but you are not weak. I will ensure my people remember this. Victor's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. That's all we ask. As Xylox departed, Victor remained where he was, staring out into the void. The duel had been more than a fight. It had been a statement. Humanity, for all its flaws and inexperience on the galactic stage, had proven its worth. They were not to be underestimated, not to be dismissed. And Victor, for all his reluctance to embrace the spotlight, had become a symbol of that resilience. The next day, the official declaration was made. Tracer Prime would remain under joint stewardship, a compromise that had seemed impossible only days before. The Zyrexians, humbled by their dual master's defeat, had accepted the terms without further argument. It was a victory, not just for the humans, but for diplomacy, proof that strength and respect could coexist. Victor Kane left the station shortly after the announcement, returning to the quiet life he had built far from the chaos of politics and war. He carried no trophies, no medals, only the katana that had served him so well. The story of the duel spread across the galaxy, growing into a legend told in countless variations. To some, Victor became a hero. To others, a curiosity. But to himself, he remained what he had always been, a man who fought only when he had to. And somewhere, on a distant Zyrexian training ground, Xylox began teaching a new generation of warriors. His lessons were harsher now, his methods less forgiving, but his message was clear. Strength alone was not enough. It was a lesson he had learned the hard way, from a human swordsman who had faced him without fear.